People in recent months here in Germany have been talking a lot about a sort of an education crisis in Germany, both at the schooling level and at the college level, if you will. I'd just like to throw some figures at you. The economics minister, Mr. Brudeler, says Germany needs 36,000 additional engineers, 66,000 IT specialists. You know, there are lots of other figures of that nature. Germany must be getting something wrong there. We talked about what Germany is getting right. There's a problem there.
Yeah, there is a problem, of course, in our educational system on the one side. On the other side, there are several parts of the population not really integrated in the workforce. We have 65% of women being employed, but 52% of them are part-time employed and not at the level they could perform. And it's true that the German youth unemployment is relatively low, but it's higher than the average. And we don't make use of the many elderly people who are qualified and who could be a significant part of our workforce. So there are sources within the country which could be integrated into the workforce.
Sorry to interrupt you, but when you go to companies or people working for your company go to companies, do you tell them this? Do you tell them that there are good people out there who aren't being properly integrated into the workforce?
No, we tell them, and even we develop program. We have developed programs of future human resource policy in view of the demographic changes the country is facing. And in fact, companies do adapt to them. For instance, Deutsche Telekom has introduced a quota for women to be part of their leadership teams, with the quota of 30%, which is not easy to achieve. So changes are happening, but changes are happening too slowly. And then we have an educational system which does not give enough attention to the so-called, in Germany, MINT-Fächer, which means mathematics, IT, natural sciences and technology. And those are, of course, the basis of an industrial development of a country like Germany.
Let me just ask you, I'd like to, because you're talking about integration here, is one of the words you're mentioning, and it is a big debate in Germany at the moment. There's an institute in Bonn, based in Bonn, called the Institute for the Study of Labour, and it confirms what we had in that report. It says your chances of getting a job are far worse if you have a foreign-sounding name. How can that be? That surely wouldn't happen at Roland Berger.
No, it does not, but we are a global firm anyhow. Our firm is global from the beginning.
But why is this happening in German companies? Why are they allowing that to happen?
I think you have to go back in history. Germany essentially 30 or 40 years ago started to ask for immigrants which were of very low qualification. We essentially asked for cleaning people and not for high qualified workers. And we are still suffering from that origins. Now, many of immigrants are in the second generation, but they didn't get the kind of education which German natives have got. So I think all this has to be changed. We have really to integrate those foreigners who live in our country. We have to make sure that they speak German. We have to make sure that they get the right access to education, also to higher education, to university, and that they have really then opportunities in the labor market. This is not yet realized to the extent necessary.
Okay, but I think we are on the right path, more or less, in Germany. We're talking about
developing.
There you go. We're talking about integration. Let's move on to another real German topic, the topic of reunification. After German reunification, there was a major problem in that most of the old East German economy was no longer viable in the tough new environment known as capitalist market economy. The German government created a giant agency called the Treuhandanstalt to wind down, to sell off or to privatize the old communist-era conglomerates, the so-called VEBs, or people-owned enterprises. Here's the story.
The German company Ardelt manufactures cranes for the international market. Its special-purpose machinery is in demand all over the world, from Vietnam to Chile. It's one of former East Germany's success stories, a firm that managed to transition from a socialist planned economy to a market economy. That's thanks in part to the Treuhand agency. When the Berlin Wall came down, East Germany had more than 12,000 state-owned firms like Ardelt. Most of them were considered obsolete and woefully inefficient. They employed 4 million people. The Treuhand Agency, which was set up by the last East German government, faced a Herculean task.
I worked in industry personally, and I knew it couldn't possibly be competitive. The quality was such that we would never have been able to stand a chance internationally.
All East German companies and collectives were placed under the Treuhand Agency. They were worth the equivalent of 300 billion euros. It was a huge organization that was charged with privatizing all the state-owned companies in record time. For the last president of the Treuhand Agency, that basically meant selling off the firms to Western investors.
Privatization is the best way to restructure and our best opportunity.
But the market conditions were not on their side. After the monetary union, the former East German currency was converted into Western Deutschmarks, 1-to-1. That meant East Germans could buy West German goods. Overnight, demand for East German products collapsed, leaving the manufacturers high and dry. Nearly 4,000 firms were shut down and nearly 3 million people lost their jobs. Over 7,000 firms were sold to investors, but many only wanted the company assets and weren't interested in running the business, which they regarded as a competitor. That's what happened to this modern cold rolling mill. Here, too, the Treuhand Agency oversaw privatization. Even before reunification, the company, which had a workforce of almost 1,200 people, was sold to the West German steel firm Krupp. But Krupp never invested the 20 million euros that it promised. Instead, the 1,200 jobs were axed. In 1993, Krupp stopped production completely and sold the equipment to China. In 1994, Birgit Breuel closed the huge state holding. What remained was some 100 billion euros of debt and a virtually deindustrialized East Germany.
Well, Roland Berger, you were very much involved in the process that we've just been hearing about. And in the period immediately after German reunification, you told the then Chancellor, Helmut Kohl, that this process of privatization was going to be a rough ride. I think that's a fair sort of statement. It was certainly very messy and very painful, wasn't it?
It was in particular painful for the citizens of the then GDR. 2/3 of the employees had to change their jobs.
They lost their jobs, first of all.
They lost their jobs. They had to look for another one, and they had to requalify. Essentially, their know-how was lost. It proved not useful in the new environment. So it was a lot of personal tragedies. But on the other hand, if you sum up this transformation process, we can and draw the lines, I think we can make a positive statement. The GDR economy is competitive. The employment level is as high as it used to be during the old GDR times, and their incomes are a lot higher. And of course, you add to that the personal freedom and the benefits of democracy and all that. So I think it was a painful process, yes, but it was a necessary process, and the transformation happened a lot faster than it did, for instance, in other ex-communist countries.
Okay, we're talking here, I'd like to go on to a little bit more of an abstract level. We're talking here about the process of privatization, and I'd like to ask you this. Often these days there's a sort of an almost ideological tendency to act as though the state can't get much right and the private sector is much more likely to get things right. What's your take on that debate?
No, I think essentially it's right. It's the task of the private sector to perform productively. On the other hand, I think it's very, very important that the state or the politics or the society creates the framework in which private operators can operate. So I think the values of a society are respected by private competitors, but competition keeps things more lively, more productive, faster growing, more innovative, and that's what makes the private sector so important.
That was a perfect description of what we call here in Germany the social market economy by Roland Berger there. Now, when we're talking about all these economic issues, everybody these days is talking about globalization, and very often it's talked about as if it were the whole story. But one way that people are getting used to living in the modern world with all its complexities is by going local and regional at the same time as going global. One example, the German state of Bavaria.